everyone, and welcome once again to Ask the Treksperts, the show where we answer your questions about Star Trek. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Sarah.
And Sarah and I, last week, went to see The Best of Both Worlds at the movie theater.
Yeah, and that was great. I never thought I'd be able to see those in the movie theater.
That was really the right pick for that season, right?
Yes.
What Fathom Events is doing right now, in case you don't know, is as the Blu-rays for Next Generation are coming out, before they put the Blu-rays out, they put a couple episodes in the movie theater. So you can go see them, and you can see some of the special features that they're putting out on the Blu-rays, which is really nice for us because we're not necessarily going to buy those, at least not right away, certainly.
Not yet.
So it's kind of neat to get to go and see them in the big screen and see those. And I wasn't real sure about what they did with first season because they showed Farpoint, and I was like, yeah, I don't know if I have to go see that in the big screen. And then second season, I've talked about on the channel before, they did a couple things, one of which was Measure of a Man, and it was this extended version, which was neat because I didn't even know that footage existed. And then this time, of course, they did Best of Both Worlds, which what else were you going to do? I mean, finally we're to something that is kind of cinematic worthy.
Yeah. Worthy of the big screen.
Yeah, exactly. So I was really stoked that we got to see it that way. So, Sarah, today I think we should review the episode just in general, but also talk a little bit about that experience and what it was like to watch it together like that, because it was a little bit
very
interesting
because they didn't break it the way they normally do.
Yeah.
If you have the DVD box set or watch it any other way.
Or if you watched it on television and you had to wait the 3 months.
Yeah.
So I want to discuss that phenomenon,
Yes.
but first off, why don't we just briefly talk a little bit about the special features that we got to see in the theater, because they showed us some interviews that they've done recently, and we got to see a lot of people that I haven't seen do interviews since the original TNG box sets, which are like 10 years old at this point. So you see a lot of visual effects people and producers and things, and everybody's gotten really old, man.
Yeah, it was so weird to see some of them, especially, I don't know, I always pay attention to Frakes, but
yeah,
Frakes
is aging well, though.
He's aging well, but
he's looking a little grandfatherly, but he's aging well.
Yeah. I don't know, it just makes me feel old and makes me want to go back and watch some early TNG. So.
And then, of course, Patrick Stewart continues to look like he always did. He just sounds a little older.
Yeah.
Like he sounds kind of more groggly, and you can kind of tell in his throat.
Uh-huh.
You know that he's getting older and that sort of thing. But anyway, and then there was a really extensive interview with Elizabeth Dehaney, who played Shelby, and I mean she just went on and on and on.
Yeah,
but
it
was interesting. Yeah, it was.
And it was so funny because that was her one character in Star Trek. So for her, it was just kind of a stepping stone to other things, but it really is something that a lot of people remember her for.
Frankly, I'm not sure she did a whole great deal after that.
Sure,
I don't know her anything else, but yeah, I mean, like, that's kind of the big thing people remember her for, it seems like, and she had no idea, you know, when she made it, and it's kind of fun to listen to her talk about that because she was a soap actress, and interestingly, she was our age, when she did that job, and didn't think anything of it, and it's funny though because the way she was talking about it, about how like she didn't like science fiction, she didn't like having to do all the technobabble and that kind of stuff. The way she was talking about it, I thought that she was kind of degrading her performance a little bit. I think her performance is quite good.
There are plenty of other guest stars in Star Trek, especially, where they come in and you just can tell they have never watched anything science fiction in their lives.
Yeah.
And you don't get that sense from her. Even if that's true of her, that where she didn't really care much for science fiction and hadn't seen any Star Trek.
She did a good job.
She did great. She really filled the role. She
role,
seemed to know her stuff. She seemed to know what the character was about.
And I think maybe that's just a talent thing, because she kept talking about how she was just there to do a job and she wasn't really into the character and she didn't really know what she was doing, and maybe that just meant she was a really good actress because she faked me into thinking that she was kind of devoted to the role. Anyway, and then there were some season 3 bloopers I hadn't seen before. That was kind of fun getting to see that. So anyway, I'm sure they're going to continue doing those Fathom events for each season because I mean let's face it, it's an easy cash cow, right? But I also like what they're doing with it. So I mean, like I'm glad they're doing that, and I kind of hope they go beyond and continue to do this with like DS9 and Voyager.
That would be fun. Especially DS9.
Especially DS9. Oh yeah, that'd be cool because there's a lot of really cinematic stuff in DS9.
Exactly.
And there's something for every season for that show.
Yeah.
Yeah. So good call there. So I mean, as long as they do that, I'm gonna keep going. I'm kind of hooked on it now. Like first season, I was sort of like I don't know, and then even second, I didn't know if I was gonna go, and then I went, and it's neat because Fathom events, ticket prices are usually about $12.50, $13. They cost a little bit more because they're like these one night only things, but they do, I think, a decent job of giving you your bang for the buck because you're not just going there for the couple episodes they're showing. They give you all of this extra stuff too, so I think it's worth it. Anyway, just a quick plug for that. When they obviously Best of Both Worlds is over now. It was a one night thing, so if you missed it, you missed it. But
stay tuned for season 4.
They'll do more, yeah, and who knows what exactly they're going to do for 4. I kind of hope they do Redemption.
That would be sweet. That'd be my pick.
And would you not bet money they'll do Unification?
Surely. I mean,
surely.
That was
especially
huge.
Because of how it ties into the new stuff.
Yeah.
Surely they'll do Unification. Anyway, let's go ahead and talk about Best of Both Worlds.
Okay.
In general now, and also relate it to our experience. Why don't you start? Just any place. Let's get rolling on it.
Best of Both Worlds. It's second Borg episode, right?
Yes.
And really raises the stakes because not only do we discover that they're in our quadrant as opposed to the Delta Quadrant where we first see them, but they also assimilate people now. And,
which we didn't know before.
Right, we thought they were only interested in technology.
Right.
And they capture Picard. So basically it's the original Borg on steroids, making them really interesting, really drawing us in, setting the stakes extremely high.
And I think higher than they'd ever been in that show.
Yeah, setting it up for this cliffhanger, this epic cliffhanger into season 4 where we didn't even know if anybody was coming back.
Mm-hmm.
And then having to wrap that up and figure out how to come back from that. I have always enjoyed this episode. I always thought it was fantastic, and seeing it huge was great.
Best of Both Worlds is one of those shows that it's almost a cliche to call it the best episode of TNG now, and I think that some cliches and some stereotypes are simply kind of true. Like it's debatable if it's the best. There are certainly some other contenders. A lot of people like to go to Inner Light, episodes like that, and it's difficult to compare an action show to a really emotionally driven show.
Absolutely.
This has both of those in a certain way. I could even say, dare I say, it has the best of both worlds in that way, right?
Yeah.
But it's definitely up there for me. It's definitely one of my absolute favorites, and it holds up remarkably well. One of the things I was really surprised by is I have always complained that because Michael Piller wrote himself in a corner, famously at the end of Best of Both Worlds, he thought he was leaving the show. He writes himself in a corner, and then he actually ends up coming back and has to write the second one. And it's unusual because a lot of cliffhangers after this you'll actually see are written by multiple people, which sometimes kind of spells disaster because the second part will feel entirely different from the first part. We have a number of these in TNG, and I'm sure we'll maybe down the road we'll explore some of them. This one, he has to come back and figure out how he's going to solve this impossible problem he's set up, how he's going to get Picard back, if he's going to get Picard back, and what do you do when Riker says fire and the screen goes blank. I have always complained that the second part isn't nearly as strong as the first part, and I watched them together again, and this time watched them, as you mentioned earlier, with seamless, with nothing in between, and I gotta tell you, I don't feel that way as much as I used to. It holds up. Now, certainly, the second part isn't as intense as the first part, because some of what happens is predictable. And that's not necessarily a huge slight against the episode. It's predictable in a way you almost want it to be. First of all, Shelby is sort of, she's like a one-time character. She's either going to die or she's going to stick around. And neither of those things happen. She doesn't die. She just gets written out, which is kind of unfortunate. So in a way, that's almost a place where it wasn't predictable, and I almost wish it had been. I almost wish they'd gone one way or the other. And then you've got and then you've got the deal with Picard, where he's either going to get written out of the show or he's going to get saved. And as soon as they get him back to the ship, you kind of know how things are going to play out to a certain degree.
Yeah.
But it didn't seem as rushed and as much of a letdown as it has in viewings past.
I would say, see, I haven't had as much of the problem as you have.
No, I know.
With thinking that the second half was so much weaker than the first. See, I always liked the second half. I would have always agreed that it wasn't quite as strong as the first, but
how could it be?
How could it be? And I think part of the reason is that you get this cliffhanger, you get that awesome music after he says fire, and then you're expecting something huge. And then when it comes back in and all it is nothing happens.
Yeah.
You start on a downer.
And it's a little hard not to see the whole episode that way.
But if you see it all together, it's more of a bewildering thing, where he says fire and nothing happens, but you don't flinch because it wasn't a cliffhanger. And so you're just with him emotionally.
I think that actually made all the difference for me. And at the same time, I'm not necessarily saying that that's the only way to watch this episode, because the problem is, without having to be continued and without having that wonderful music cue, you're kind of missing this giant piece of history all at the same time.
Sure.
This being, I think to this day, at least for people that remember it, is still kind of that cliffhanger that everybody remembers as fondly as like a Who Shot JR with Dallas. And they even talked about that in the special features. That was kind of the next one of those, and then I think this really led to the dawn of the cliffhanger, where every big sci-fi show had to end on a cliffhanger. There was not a season of Smallville that didn't end on a cliffhanger. A lot of shows tend to do that now, and certainly did that pre the internet streaming era we're beginning to get into. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so you lose a little bit of that when you watch it now, because it's not as big of a moment. But then at the same time, if you don't make it as big of a moment, then it doesn't feel so, like I said, so much of a letdown.
Yeah, it doesn't feel so jarring that nothing happens.
But
I would say
it's too easy when you just come back to it. Yeah.
And I would say that most of the emotional resonance,
I guess anticlimactic was the word I was
exactly.
looking for.
Most of the emotional resonance in the episode overall is in that second half.
It is. Oh. Thank you. Yeah. One word: Guinan.
Exactly. Her best scene in the entire series is in that second half.
And I think probably one of the top 5 speeches in Star Trek is that is now your chair, when she tells Riker, you must let Picard go. The relationship that we have is beyond friendship, it's beyond family, and I will let him go.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a great moment, and you get a lot of those, and I think the episode as a whole feels just more even if you don't split them up. But
yeah, I think so too.
But on the other hand, I was waiting for that music cue when he said fire, and when he didn't pause. Yeah. I was missing that.
I think if you were to be able to watch it for the first time, like if you bought the Blu-ray, and by the way, they put that episode on a Blu-ray by itself. If you want the special features and you want to watch it, it's like $20, but it's out there now. But if you were to buy the Blu-ray. And I would assume that the season that's the thing, is that the season 3 and season 4 Blu-rays won't have it that way. So the only way that you'll ever be able to watch it that way, unless you were to do a fan edit somehow, which wouldn't look as good as their edit, would be to buy it that way. So yeah, I just thought of that. You'd actually have to buy that. See, that makes me on the fence about it, because they're probably not going to put all those special features on the season 3 or 4. Well, we'll talk about it eventually. Maybe we'll do it. But anyway. Going beyond all of that, there are certainly a couple of kind of missteps in the episodes. One of them is just that Picard gets rescued a little too easily. Maybe not rescued too easily so much as comes back from being a Borg a little bit lickety-split at the end. Family helps with that a lot, though. You watch the very next episode, and they kind of deal with all that emotional stuff they couldn't deal with in Best of Both Worlds. Yeah.
It's nice because you get this show that's known for its 5-minute wrap-ups, and then you get the emotional baggage in a follow-up episode. It's really great that they actually explore that. The one thing I would say about the physical removal from the Borg, how simple it is in this episode, is this is the first time it's ever been done.
Yeah. So you think it should have been harder?
No, I think what happened is the more we encountered the Borg, the more people started getting assimilated. And so we had to contrive reasons for, oh, it's harder this time, or it's not really all that easy, or this character's in greater danger than you
That's
have to
interesting.
expect.
I hadn't
Because
thought about it like
best of both worlds, Picard is the first person that we've seen to be kidnapped by the Borg. So,
and he's, as far as we know, the first human they've ever assimilated.
So maybe it is just that easy at this point. But if you get to Voyager, I mean, you get these nanites that are attacking, and you can't break free from the collective. So it's...
Although with certain people, it's kind of easy there too.
Yeah.
I mean,
so it's inconsistent.
There it had a little more to do though with how long you were assimilated. I'm not sure that's completely inconsistent. I mean, like, 7 of 9 took almost 2 seasons to get fully acclimated.
Sure.
If you can even say she ever got fully acclimated.
But on the other hand,
and that's why she still had to have implants. Picard wasn't even. I think part of the thing is Picard wasn't even fully assimilated. He would have had more than, I think, just that half a headpiece.
Yeah, but on the other hand, if you go to First Contact, you get some guy who has tubules in his neck. 30 seconds later, Picard's shooting him in the face.
I know.
Or,
yeah.
Wherever.
But I don't like to go to First Contact too much with stuff like that, just because it's inconsistent, because it's an action movie, and because that makes for good drama in an action movie when you're trying to go fast. You know what I mean? So, and there's plenty of inconsistencies between TNG and Voyager, and I think we've done an episode on this. So I don't know. I guess the thing for me is less that they were able to wake him up too quick, and more that he so quickly found himself when he was, standing in that big pond thing. On the other hand, I do really appreciate the foreshadowing at the beginning of that. It's funny because we're pretty much just talking about part 2, because that's what most of the story is. Although we need to go to the Riker-Shelby stuff, because most of that's set up in the first episode.
Yeah.
But at really the beginning of the second part, you see that wonderful effect where Picard's face goes white, and it's one of the coolest things in TNG, I think. And you get this really cool moment where you see, and I didn't notice it the first time I saw it. You almost need to watch it on a larger screen to see it, where you see the single tear go down his cheek.
Yeah.
And I really think, unless I'm reading too much into it, that they're somewhat foreshadowing that Picard's still in there.
Yeah, I absolutely.
And that makes it a little bit easier to swallow the ending. Wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, I think it's really showing that his consciousness is buried, but it is just below the surface, and he's sort of fighting against the Borg collective in his mind. But you can't break free and do what you want to do because they're overpowering you. So.
One thing I think is really important to mention before we go to the Riker stuff on a technical note, on a production note, is that when you finish a season, you're kind of on fumes money-wise usually. Like, you've spent a lot of your budget for the season. Usually the way TV budgets work, at least, especially then, is you would get, a certain amount of money for the season. So when you got to the end, you might not have as much as you'd like to have.
Right.
Best of Both Worlds, you can't tell. It's the biggest episode of the series at that point, certainly. And then part 2 looks just as big as part 1. And they do things in that show that they don't do, I want to say, anywhere else in that series. Like, you've got that great shot with Worf and somebody else, I forget, in a shuttlecraft, where you actually see them exit the ship in the shuttlecraft with like the ship in space going past them, and then a dogfight in the background. Like, you don't see that in TNG.
Yeah.
That was really cool that we got that shot and things like it.
Yeah, and especially the battleground of Wolf 359 and how many miniatures they had in that shot.
Yeah.
With the floating debris and everything. That's really cool.
And I mean, they had to fake a lot of it, but it looks fantastic. This is maybe Riker's best episode, or really close to Riker's best episode.
He has a lot of really good episodes, but this is definitely up there for him.
And we should probably mention Sarah is a gigantic Riker fan. So, so being as big of a Will Riker fan as you are, how do you feel about the Riker-Shelby relationship, the business with Riker not being able to articulate why he won't take a command, and ultimately his decision not to take a command by the end, which I'm not sure is fully explored.
See, okay, the Riker-Shelby stuff.
Yeah.
Back when I first saw this episode, almost 10 years ago now, I thought he was a little bit ridiculous with Shelby. But as I got to know Riker as a character, the clash seemed to make more sense to me. Because the first time I watched this episode, I didn't have very much Riker background. I didn't really know who he was. So I thought he was just dogging on her and, not really letting her have any leeway. But I think it's totally within his character to do that. And I think compounding the part where he sees so much of himself in her, and he realized that she's after his position, and maybe even trying to edge him out and off the Enterprise. And I think that all works where he's been given commands and has rejected them because he really sees the people on the Enterprise as his family, and he feels like he's in a good place, and I think that's where he wants to stay, where being second in command on the Enterprise is better than having your own ship anywhere.
Yeah. And I think that's really interesting. And of course, again, going to movies, way later, he finally does take his own command. I think at some point he kind of outgrows that. But the idea, and this is very consistent through the series. I think Riker is one of the single most consistent characters in Star Trek, past first season at least.
Yeah.
Where once they let him start being a little bit more like Jonathan Frakes and a little bit less of a stick in the mud, because you already have that with Picard, especially early on. So you need somebody who's a little bit more lively and a little more youthful.
Yeah.
And what you get with Riker is a guy who was always insanely ambitious and always wanted his own command, and then got with Picard on the Enterprise and was... Shelby says he's in the shadow of a great man, but I'd rather think that it's more... I'm working with almost as an equal with a great man, and I don't know how to leave that. I don't know how having my own command and doing other work on some other ship is going to be better than what I'm doing here.
And if you think about it, since this is TNG and not original, he's the one who gets to go on all the away missions.
Precisely.
And that's kind of a big thing right after Picard gets taken. He wants to lead the away mission to rescue Picard. And everybody has to hold him back. And it's Troy has
to tell him it's not appropriate for you to go.
He's in command now. He's the acting captain at that point, and so he has to send Shelby over. And you can just see that he is really disappointed to not be able to go.
One of the episodes this reminds me a lot of that happens later, actually, is Second Chances. I don't know if it reminds you of that, but I find myself reminded of the whole business with him and his transporter twin, where you get Thomas Riker, and part of why he doesn't like Thomas Riker is because he reminds him of some of those old qualities he used to possess. And he's a challenge to him because at the same time, he's grown, he's matured, he is in a lot of ways a better person, and yet he wonders if he's lost something from that more youthful, more ambitious self. So you got Thomas Riker looking at him like, why are you still the first officer on a starship when you could have been a captain by now? And you have him taking all these brash, quick, impulsive kinds of chances. And thing with Shelby.
Yeah, I hadn't made that comparison.
And part of the reason he's so challenged by these characters is because a part of him likes these characters.
Yeah.
And he feels like he has to force himself to dislike them to a certain degree. So like it's this clash. He likes them. He likes he likes the part of himself that he sees in them, but he also resists it because he knows he can't have that again. He knows that he can't bring that back to himself again.
Yeah.
I think Shelby is a character that very easily could have stuck around.
I think so.
And I think she could have stuck around either as Riker's first officer had Picard left the show, which I don't think was ever really in the cards.
Yeah.
Or, I think that they convinced people that it was, but ultimately I don't think it was ever in the cards that Patrick Stewart was going to leave that show. Or I could have even seen her staying on the ship in some other capacity, maybe, or just being a recurring character that came back in places. But once he makes her his first officer, and he has that great speech where he says, we don't have to like each other to work well together, I think that she is the single best contender of a one-shot character to have a romance with Riker.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, it's always nice when you can get two characters that have real thick tension at the beginning, and they almost hate each other.
They have tension and chemistry.
Exactly.
Simultaneously.
And then you pull back the tension, and suddenly there's a connection there.
Yeah, she strikes me as his type in a lot of ways. And you look at her, and you look at the friction they have, but also the mutual respect they have for each other, and you wonder why he was ever with Troy.
Yeah.
Or at least I do.
Yeah. Well, I almost saw it as kind of a Spider-Man Black Cat relationship, where you figure, you got two superpowered people, they really should be together, but they're not.
Yeah, because they're equals in prowess.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, in command prowess,
Yes. In ambition and in interests.
Yeah, and they both have leadership skills. One of the things I like about Shelby is that the episode doesn't have to work too hard to convince me that she's capable of what she says she is. She is capable, and you could totally see her as not just being the first officer on a starship, but potentially being the first officer on that starship.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's not easy to pull off. There are plenty of other episodes where they bring people in like that, and you're like, I don't know about it. But TNG had a decent track record of that sort of thing, where they'd bring somebody in, and if they wanted you to think they were great, they were great, or if they wanted you to think they were awful, they were awful. I think also about like Jellicoe and Chain of Command.
Yeah.
Jellicoe wasn't just a bad captain. He was supposed to be.
Yeah.
That was part of the point.
Yeah. We were supposed to hate him. We were supposed to be yelling at the screen, "What are you doing?" But yeah.
That's another one that we should definitely tackle at some point.
What
haven't we talked about? Yeah, we haven't really talked about the Borg at all.
We talked about a little bit,
yeah.
But yeah, the Borg are cool.
Definitely. I mean, definitely a major threat. One of the things that you got to wonder about is how they assimilate other worlds, since they're having such a tough time with humanity. This idea that they need to assimilate a spokesperson to be a singular being. Remember that Locutus actually refers to himself as I. Later on in the series, the Borg don't do that ever.
Yeah. Since this is the first time we've seen the Borg assimilate people and not just technology, all the stuff in the Delta Quadrant we have to throw out the window.
We do, sure.
And so I think what I saw, what came across to me watching this episode, was that in the Delta Quadrant they interact with more what they would consider advanced species and more advanced hierarchical structures, where maybe it's not just a hierarchy like on Earth, where they don't just have a single person in command. We don't know what kinds of species or what societies they've been confronting, but you have to imagine that they're used to confronting people that are entirely different than what they're seeing in the Alpha Quadrant.
Yeah, presumably. And you're right. You have to throw Voyager out the window, because when we get to the Delta Quadrant, all the humanoid species are far too much like they are in the Alpha Quadrant.
Yeah, exactly. So I think they're just under the assumption that the Delta Quadrant is just this new, awesome, you can't even imagine it place.
Yes.
And
you know what, I hadn't thought about it like that.
You come to the Alpha Quadrant,
right.
And you have all these societies that are all pretty much run the same, and so they're starting with Earth. They're starting with Picard, because that's the first person they encounter from the Alpha Quadrant.
And maybe they're not even used to hierarchical.
Exactly. And so they're going to start at Earth and then use that as a base for conquering the rest of the Alpha Quadrant.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And I would assume that they'd use Picard as the spokesperson for all those, but starting with Earth.
Maybe so. Yeah. Because Locutus isn't anything like as cool of an idea if it's not original. If they've done this a whole bunch of times before, I don't think it's quite as impactful. Yeah. I like the idea that the Borg, while they're straightforward and while they're not conniving, they are perhaps innovative. Mm-hmm. And when you get to Voyager, the Borg are not so innovative.
No.
In fact, as much as I guess going back to First Contact again, as much as you and I have complained and did complain when we reviewed it, that it doesn't make a lot of sense that the Borg would go back in time and all of that, I do feel like if the Borg found that technology, they might consider it within this context only because they're innovative, they try things. Mm-hmm. That's not deceptive so much as how do we cut corners and make this happen in the most efficient way possible.
And that's what makes them so scary early on.
Yeah, because they're that efficient.
Yeah, they're very efficient.
And they can think quicker than you. They can make decisions faster than you.
They can make repairs faster.
You know what I never thought about before? there's this really interesting parallel between the Borg and humanity in Best of Both Worlds that I've never even considered before, and that is, while Riker and Shelby are arguing, you could even make the argument somewhat pettily, although I don't think that they're unsympathetic characters by any stretch of the imagination. But you've got this discourse you never see on TNG because the characters that serve together every week on the show don't have these kinds of conflicts. We've got this sort of discourse going on the ship, and we can't decide what moves to make. And then you got the Borg who don't have that.
Right.
And they can very quickly, I mean, like, how long did it take them to formulate the plan? Okay, so we're gonna take Picard off the bridge of the Enterprise, we're gonna assimilate him, he's gonna facilitate. He does all of that within the first 45 minutes of the episode, just, real quick. Yeah. And they haven't even, at that point, decided, they haven't even quite decided yet whether or not they're even going to consider Shelby's plan. I think they've just decided that by the time Picard gets taken, that, okay, we're going to use that as a fallback. But this idea that a hierarchical structure, that is a hard word to say, a hierarchical...
Archical.
Thank you, structure, wow, what is wrong with me? It definitely has its advantages, and it's necessary for, unless you have some kind of a committee sort of thing, but besides just like a board of directors running a starship, it's necessary to keep everyone's identities intact, and ultimately it's people's individual thinking that makes certain innovations happen, and that's ultimately, I would argue, the episode is telling us that's the reason they're able to beat the Borg, is because that's what they have that the Borg don't have. Mm-hmm. It's not like what Worf says, it's not just they have no honor, so they're gonna die, right, or they're gonna lose, right?
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm saying is that is kind of, it's like that's our greatest strength, that's our greatest weakness. The Borg's greatest strength and their greatest weakness is the opposite of that. Yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Really good stuff.
Good stuff.
Why did I never think of that before? But it's there.
The hierarchy approves.
Anyway, we've been going a little while. What else did you want to bring up?
I think what haven't we covered?
What haven't we covered?
We covered the end, we covered the Borg, we covered Shelby.
And you could go scene by scene all day, because there's not a scene here that doesn't need to be here, and there's a lot of great stuff, and there's a lot of great acting in this episode, and I think that the guest stars were really well picked. We've got I can't remember his name off the top of my head. We've got the guy playing J.P. Hansen, who tragically dies at Wolf 359, and he's a great actor. I mentioned Smallville earlier. He was ironically a cryptofreak in first season of Smallville. He was the guy who falls in the in the water, and he's that old murderer. He's the eternal youth guy. He gets electrocuted in his wheelchair with kryptonite, and then he. But anyway, that's that guy. Yeah. But he's also God in Star Trek V. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that guy real quick. And we touched on Guinan, but yeah, I think Whoopi Goldberg's finest performance in the series.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess we should rate real quick. Go ahead.
4.
Yeah, it's definitely a 4. I mean,
yeah.
It's...
Yeah, and I think we covered all the reasons.
All the reasons, sure.
Yeah.
Well, everybody, thanks as always for watching Ask the Treksperts, and next time we will try really hard to do some kind of a discussion that's not an episode review. We've been doing a lot of episode reviews lately. So this is your chance. Give us a question for discussion, anything you'd like us to talk about, and we'll definitely consider things. Anything having to do with Star Trek, we'll definitely consider it. We've got Star Trek Into Darkness coming up here really soon, and Sarah and I will definitely be doing a review, hopefully opening weekend for that. We're going to do our level best to bring that to you the weekend it comes out. Anything else going on? There's we've still got to do Wrath of Khan. I want to try to do that before Darkness if we can, so we'll do our best on that. And anyway, until we meet again in 2 weeks, I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Sarah.
And we'll see you next time.